I think that the issue of hard cases needs to be addressed more rigorously. There are too many people in these large communities for which we are trying to fashion political and legal systems. And amongst these many people, 300 million, too many of them are hard cases where they really cannot be dismissed as simply being negligent about their lives, but they are just unfortunate. They have suffered from some mishap, some misfortune, medically, mentally, whatever. They're not oppressed by anybody. They just can't get going on their own. And while I have a far greater trust that free men and women, if they genuinely are free and they're not distorted by a welfare state, would be generous and kind to come to the aid of such people, I recognize that many people want some guarantee that it's not enough to count on the goodwill of your neighbor. They want some safety net, something. And even if it's ultimately not true that that's going to solve the problem, I believe that too many people of goodwill believe it's true. And the libertarian movement, I think that the issue of hard cases needs to be addressed more rigorously. There are too many people in these large communities for which we are trying to fashion political and legal systems. And amongst these many people, 300 million, too many of them are hard cases where they really cannot be dismissed as simply being negligent about their lives, but they are just unfortunate. They have suffered from some mishap, some misfortune, medically, mentally, whatever. They're not oppressed by anybody. They just can't get going on their own. And while I have a far greater trust that free men and women, if they genuinely are free and they're not distorted by a welfare state, would be generous and kind to come to the aid of such people, I recognize that many people want some guarantee that it's not enough to count on the goodwill of your neighbor. They want some safety net, something. And even if it's ultimately not true that that's going to solve the problem, I believe that too many people of goodwill believe it's true. And the libertarian movement and scholarly community needs to address this without always brushing it off as being just a misunderstanding or some sort of a power grab or whatnot. That's the political end of it. I think that there's also some missed opportunity. I'll give you one example. Government regulation doesn't sit well with a philosophy of freedom. And yet, very few people notice. I am one of the few ones who has ever made notice of the fact that government regulation involves prior restraint, that you are imposing burdens on people who have not been proven to have done anybody any harm or any wrong or violated anyone's rights or done anything that justifies imposing these burdens on them. And yet, for some reason that I can't fathom, people don't lay in on them for this reason. They somehow give them a pass. Government regulations say, well, there's too many of them, there's too much of it, it's sometimes counterproductive, regulators get captured by the industry, they try to regulate. There's all this razzmatazz, missing the most fundamental point, that the institution is fundamentally unjust. Because, as in the criminal law, you don't put somebody to jail until you really convict him. So, in addressing the economy, you don't penalize people unless you have demonstrated that they deserve this. I don't know why this is not rolled out. I have rolled it out since 1979. And it sort of people's eyes glaze over when I point this out. And I think this is because most of the people who address the economic features of a free society tend to be positivist economists. And so they don't like to deal with a more normative point like the prior restraint point. And I wish they would, but it'll take a while, because positivism, through the influence of scientism, still rules the social scientific community. And especially the libertarian social scientific community. They don't dare enter into value judgments because they're afraid of the is-ought gap, that you cannot make any intelligible moral normative judgments, and so you just roll out a bunch of studies. But studies never accomplish the one thing that you need to accomplish in defending the free society, and that is to defend its principles. Instead, it's all heuristic and pragmatic and, utilitarian and so on. And oddly enough, let me give you an example. There is no hesitation on the part of most people in condemning rape. They don't say, well, maybe sometimes it pleases some people more than the victim is hurt. They never do that, right? Because they recognize that this is a direct invasion of a person. And that's a no-no. There's no excuse for it. I don't know why they can't extend that attitude, that disposition, toward property rights, toward personal injury, or anything like that. Why is it only rape? Is that a politically convenient thing to insist on, but not elsewhere? I think that when you deprive people of their earnings, or even the things that they just happen to luck into through their, extraordinary good health or beauty, but not because they have done anything wrong to anybody, you are committing a blatant injustice. And I think that libertarians need to unite on that theme more. And until they do so, they will not get the upper hand. They will not have what I think is absolutely essential in political debates, a sense of righteousness. Righteousness wins in political debates if they are well-grounded, if it's well-grounded, if it's not phony, because it shows you that you're outraged by the way people are treated. And without that outrage, people say, well, okay, I guess you're not upset about it. I'll just go and use people against their will. We'll herd them together. We'll do experiments on them. We'll rob them of their property. We'll take from Peter and give to Paul. Nobody is really terribly upset about that. And I think defenders of the free society need to be more outraged by the violence done to people because of all these other maybe desirable goals, but not desirable enough to violate anybody's rights. Now, I think maybe at the very bottom of this is something that takes us back to Rand. the appreciation of the value of the individual. I gave a talk in Milan last week where I was invited to address a Students for Liberty conference, an international conference. One of the major issues that needs to be taken care of by libertarians, and they're not philosophically equipped as libertarians because it's a political but not a full philosophy, to ascertain the importance of individual human beings. Because without that, defending your rights is always going to be kind of like a sheepish thing to do. Well, yes, my life matters a little, and for that reason, let's defend our rights. No, your life matters a whole hell of a lot. And that's why defending your rights must be a major imperative in any human community. But until this courage about asserting oneself, and that's the problem, because the self has had such a bad reputation since original sin and since Hobbes, that it has never been able to stand up and say, yes, I, Tibor Machan, is important enough, and don't mess with me. You don't get to do that with impunity, even if your goals are very important. Most libertarians don't have the philosophical equipment to defend this attitude, and I think they need it.